literature on work groups,
Yes.
which gives you the normative, patterns.
Right.
Is that literature essentially studying the same type of organization each time?
No, that's quite a range of organizations.
Okay.
The one meta-study had 37 different studies. They were all different kinds of teams.
They're all over the place.
Yeah.
All right, so
all kinds of.
the literature says you studied all different types of ways of organizing work, and they basically, the pattern is this.
Yep.
Now you come along with something, another way of organizing work.
Right.
And the pattern is this. Okay. That's it.
And I think that's the stark reality, and where you have to say, I think what you're saying is this is evidence for the fact, yes, this is different, radically different. And yes, it does need different measures, but, and we certainly don't know all the answers as to why this has happened, but hopefully this is a first step, at least to try to explain it and try to maybe relate it to this idea of the platform, or whatever we call it, the socio-cultural platform. Blurb. Okay, blurb. So with the right kind of blurb. Anyway, so that's also one.
I just had one other general observation. I think I noticed that when you were writing about other people's findings, that you were you wrote it in such a way that wasn't reflective of royal we. I was always taught.
What's reflective of?
The use of the royal word we. We find to this, we find that. I was always taught that unless you're pregnant or you have a tapeworm, you should never use the word we when it comes to your own research. The data.
So for that, you have a tapeworm.
These data, I don't know if you want to volunteer, Ron, but I was so struck by that I went back and actually counted. I thought it sounds really weird. But there are 265 royal we's. I'm going to ask you, please, just change those around. It will read so much better.
Okay, I'm certainly open to, honestly, it really is a read. This is not, it really
Not
is.
your dissertation.
Well,
You
I understand,
can
but
You can't say that.
You can't go to credit, we don't care. That's right.
I know, but I feel
The,
there's been a lot of input to this.
and I'll come back to that. The way to make that to be is to publish. Okay,
Absolutely.
so my next question is, what's the path in that direction?
Right, so publishing, well, we've already submitted, we have, we're co-authors, so Professor Lee and I, so published a chapter on using these as metrics. So it was kind of the idea of health metrics in open source communities and also even more generally virtual communities. But I think the actual result here, the fundamental result, might be good to publish it and say like MISQ or maybe even ISR.
But I think the question is more about the title.
The title would be something like, the normative social network structures in open source, or maybe what that means. But the fun, because even though there's, we've talked a lot today about kind of where this goes from here, I think there is a fundamental result that needs to be reported, and that is that we're seeing low closure is associated with successful projects and project communities. And that result and the support behind it, I think, that's what I would suggest would be something like a normative social structures or something like that. But also maybe something about virtual development communities that talks about the notion of developing in this method, maybe like more for CACM, kind of a more, management view, or we talked about maybe even like work dynamics of kind of stepping back more applied and what does this mean in terms of managing development efforts.
Well, there's this one last question that I promised that I would ask you, and that is, what What would you like to see your PhD student work on?
Yeah. Well, I think, number one would be to maybe take this more intensive look at trying to replicate these results. Like if we did a multiple case study, let's say, and studied open source projects.
And that's working out the details. What bold idea
The
would you like?
bold ones, I think, are beginning to address the general open source model, trying to define that, do some comparative studies against Wikipedia, maybe compare to science. E-science would be very interesting. And then I really think the idea of design research of the platform would be very interesting, because you could do a lot of experimentation. That's the good part about this, is it's quite easy, relatively speaking, to experiment with different platforms. Here you go. Different blobs to see what happens. You could open up 10 different blobs and see differentially what happens. And
Why don't you just call it different organizing principles? Forget about the platform mediation.
I think I like Bob better. Then it's clear that nobody knows what you're talking about.
Okay, I mean, I'll definitely think about that.
Basic logical organizing behavior or something.
Right. Well, there.
Blah, blah, blah. Are we set? Let David take the walk. Thank you. Now, this is the time when I have to ask all of our audience to also accompany David